Okay. So, my name is Michael. I'm a founding engineer at Dosu, and I'm here to tell you how to get documentation by default with the Dosu MCP Server, which we just launched this month. We're really excited about it. It's part of our vision for automating knowledge transfer between humans and agents. So at the end of 2025, Anthropic released their 2026, always ahead of the game, State of AI Agents report. And they said that the top two challenges that companies reported with agentic development were poor data quality and bad integration with their existing systems. Now, we think those are linked problems. Your existing systems have a lot of information about how your organization operates that's not visible to a coding agent that only sees your code. So we want to give human context, but we don't want to clutter the context window. So these days, you can get an MCP for pretty much any SaaS productivity tool that you use. You can install Linear's MCP server, Notion's MCP server, GitHub's, and so on. But what you're going to find if you do that is a few problems. One is they can have conflicting or outdated information. So maybe your search finds a PRD from V0 of a feature, but that was 4 versions ago. You also can find a lot of context bloat if you keep adding more and more MCP servers. So every server has its own instructions for how to use it, how to use its tools, and those fill up your context window before you even type anything into the prompt box. The other thing is a lot of times they're inefficient with the output that they provide as well. So you'll get an entire document back when you really only needed to know one little detail from all of those many paragraphs of text that your model has now had to process. So what we're trying to do with Dosu is integrate information from everywhere that you work into one token-efficient source of information for your coding agent. The other part of that, and in fact, in some ways, maybe even a more important part of that, is that agents do not accumulate and share knowledge like your human engineers do. So we want agents to document what they learn. And I'll show you this in just a second, that Claude, when you ask it to build a new feature, it'll say, okay, I'm going to study the existing patterns in the code base. But it'll say that over and over and over again every time you use it. It doesn't remember the last time that it found those patterns. And the other problem that a lot of people have there is that it can find a pattern that is maybe not your current best practice. Maybe it's the legacy code that you wrote years ago that doesn't reflect the current way that you want to do things. So we're going to look at a real example from us using Dosu at Dosu that shows how our MCP server can act as a shared knowledge layer for Claude Code. And I hope you'll forgive me here. I pre-prepared the terminal window because I didn't want to have to wait on Claude. So I do want to show you, we're talking about a code base that's not huge, but 800,000 lines, not bad. We're zeroing in on 1 million pretty quick. And so there's a lot for Claude to find, potentially. And sometimes it finds good things, and sometimes not. So here's an example where I've asked it to add a new database table for me. Pretty common operation. I've done this with Claude before. But the first thing it says, like we talked about, is, well, let me first examine your existing database schema. And I'll try to understand the structure and the content. And it does, but what it ends up finding is an artifact that we generate to validate our schemas in CI. It doesn't actually control the schema. It documents what the schema is, but Claude doesn't know that. So it tries to edit our generated schema file instead of writing a migration, which is what we'd really like it to do. So you can see here I had to correct it, and I had to explain to it, no, you need to use a Supabase migration to do this. And what we want Claude to do with Dosu is remember that for next time. So with our MCP server, we give a few different tools, but the ones I want to highlight are these two at the bottom, init knowledge and save topic. So we'll show them in the opposite order here. So save topic is when Claude is finished working, it writes back the themes and the key information that it learned from the session to the Dosu knowledge store. And so then the next time it goes to do that task, when it calls our init knowledge tool, it'll know what the best practices are. It'll reference that documentation that it's been building from the last time you used it. So you can see here, when it finally did manage to talk Claude through writing this migration for me, it says at the end, okay, I've saved that information back to Dosu for future reference. It's called our save topic tool, and it's saved information in Dosu's knowledge store to use for next time. And so over time, you end up building up documents like this that show, okay, here's our standard, our best practice for adding a new database table. You need to enable RLS. You need to give policies for RLS. We automatically have updated timestamps on all of the database tables that we write. And now Claude knows that. So if I ask it again to write a database migration for me, it will actually retrieve this document on database schema patterns and conventions from the Dosu knowledge store, and it'll use those patterns and conventions instead of doing its own research again. Now, what we find is, and this is just walking through what we just talked about, but I had screenshots just in case. What we find when we do this is that we actually, not only do we save tokens, so you can see here we're using, in terms of cost, only about half as much cost per run. In terms of time, round about half as much time per run, and also the variance on all these numbers goes down. Because when Claude does its own research, well, sometimes it finds the wrong thing, you have to correct it, you have to steer it, that wastes tokens and it wastes times. It also means that run to run, it is more consistent as well. So what you'll find is if you ask Claude to do the same thing 5 times, you'll often get different implementations each time. And what we observe with Dosu is that 4 out of 5 runs will get the same implementation because we have that knowledge layer that's steering it towards what our standards and practices are in our organization. So, in a lot of ways, you can think about Dosu as almost like a knowledge caching layer, right? So what you can see here is essentially the effect of a knowledge cache hit on the performance of a coding agent. But we also all know that part of the problem with caches is that you have to invalidate your cache. So the other piece of it for Dosu is what we call self-documenting pull requests. So that means that all of that documentation that's written into the Dosu knowledge store, every time you push a commit to your repository, it scans the knowledge that it has and asks, should anything be updated here? So if you're changing framework, adding a new interface, deprecating an interface, renaming a feature, Dosu will pick that up, it'll identify the documentation that change has made stale, and it'll make suggestions for how you could improve that documentation to better reflect the current state of your code moving forward. So, as much as we've seen automation in other parts of software development over the past 20 years with linting and CI pipelines and type checking and all of that, there's been very little automation around documentation processes. It's really a manual process of knowledge transfer for most teams. We think that we can change that with the Dosu knowledge infrastructure that we're building. And we think that this MCP server that we've shown is one big step towards always having up-to-date documentation by default. So we would love to have you learn more. If you stop by our booth, you can scan a QR code and get a meeting directly with our founder, Devin. And yeah, please check us out to learn more about how to get your knowledge infrastructure in shape for the AI coding era that we're all facing. Thanks.